Michael Jackson was the most famous entertainer on the planet, a face known in every corner of the world. But while millions watched him on stage, someone else was watching him much more closely. For nearly a decade, the FBI quietly kept a file on the King of Pop, hundreds of pages, forensic experts, agents flying across the country and even overseas. And for years, almost no one knew it existed. Before we get into what they were hunting for, and the conclusion that genuinely changed how people see this story, do me one quick favor. Hit that subscribe button. This channel digs into the stories the headlines left out, and your subscription is what keeps them coming. Okay, let's get into it. It started the way these things often do with a Freedom of Information Act request. After Jackson's death, the family's longtime attorney asked the government a simple question. Did the FBI ever investigate Michael Jackson? The answer came back as a stack of documents, and what was inside surprised even the people closest to him.
It was really kind of a surprise when we got these documents. Back in August, I learned that there was an FBI file on Michael Jackson. I made a request under the Freedom of Information Act, and as a result, this is what we have. We have the files coming out. There's some 673 pages, but the FBI has only released 333 pages.
Here's where it gets stranger. The full file ran to roughly 670 pages, but only about 330 were ever released. Less than half. Which leaves an obvious question hanging. What's in the pages they're still holding back? First, an important point: a federal file on Michael Jackson wasn't as unusual as it sounds. The Bureau has held files on Marilyn Monroe, Frank Sinatra, Martin Luther King Jr., even a sitting Supreme Court justice. Fame tends to attract federal attention, and in Jackson's case, the file painted him as two very different things at once: a potential criminal and a potential victim.
There are FBI files on Marilyn Monroe, Frank Sinatra, Martin Luther King, even former Supreme Court Justice William Rehnquist. Many involve threats.
So why does the FBI step into a case like this at all? According to a former agent who worked these files, it usually isn't because the Bureau takes over, it's because local police hit the limits of what they can do and call in the FBI for the things only the FBI has.
We also have the forensic capabilities.
FBI forensic scientists pored over Jackson's computers looking for evidence of child pornography.
Think of it less like the FBI launching its own manhunt, and more like a specialist being called in. Local detectives don't always have the tools to pull evidence off a hard drive, or the experience to plan a sensitive interview, so they reach out to the Bureau's experts, including the famous profiling unit at Quantico. That was the FBI's role across much of the Jackson file. Not the lead investigator, but the specialist on call. The earliest entries go back to 1993. According to the documents, the Bureau looked into claims involving inappropriate phone calls with a boy in London. Agents reportedly assisted with interview strategy for a young accuser, and FBI forensic scientists combed through Jackson's computers, searching for any evidence of illegal material. This was the serious side of the file, the side that treated Michael Jackson as a suspect. The investigation was thorough, well-resourced, and it stretched across state lines and across an ocean. Remember that, because where it eventually landed is the entire point of this story.
We learned today that as early as 1993, there were allegations that Jackson made sexually charged phone calls with a boy in London.
But the file had another half, and this is the part most people never hear. Because Michael Jackson wasn't only being watched, he was also being threatened. The documents detail a man who'd become dangerously obsessed with Jackson's sister, Janet. In a series of bizarre letters, he made chilling threats, including a claim that he'd carry out a mass killing at a Michael Jackson concert if that's what it took. He even threatened the President of the United States. He was eventually arrested outside the home of Michael Jackson's own parents. So while the public imagined Jackson as untouchable, behind the scenes he was living with the very real, very dark side of being the most famous man alive.
The new FBI files detail how Michael Jackson received death threats from a man obsessed with his famous sister, Janet. In a series of bizarre letters, which included threats against President George Herbert Walker Bush, Frank Paul Jones writes he'd commit mass murder at a Michael Jackson concert, if necessary, in an attempt to murder Michael. Jones was eventually arrested outside the home of Jackson's parents.
Then came 2005, the trial that dominated headlines worldwide. And the FBI's involvement went deeper than anyone realized at the time. The media circus around the courthouse grew so enormous that local authorities became worried about something most people never considered: security. They actually asked the FBI to assess whether the trial had become a soft target, a potential opportunity for an attack, simply because of the sheer crowd it drew. That's how big this had gotten. The trial of a pop star had become a matter of national security planning.
So concerned about the media circus surrounding the 2005 Michael Jackson's child molestation trial, they asked the FBI to assess whether it was a soft target for terrorism.
Now, if these files existed for years, why release them at all? And why hold back so many pages? The reasoning is fairly straightforward. Material that might still be used as evidence, or that's under review, generally stays sealed. And just as importantly, the Bureau protects the identities of people who gave information, whether that information was true or not. That's usually what those thick black bars across the page are. It isn't always about hiding wrongdoing. Sometimes it's about protecting people. Which brings us to the moment this entire story turns on. After all of it, the forensic teams, the years of files, investigations reaching from Chicago to the Philippines, one question matters most. After looking at everything they could get their hands on, what did the FBI actually conclude?
There's not one scrap of evidence that Michael Jackson ever harmed a child, did anything wrong, committed any crime. It's almost a vindication.
Read that again. Hundreds of pages, years of work, computer forensics, cross-country investigations. And according to the attorney who reviewed the released files, not one scrap of evidence that Michael Jackson ever harmed a child or committed a crime. The man who'd represented the Jackson family for 2 decades called it something close to a vindication. The FBI looked at everything and came up empty. And if you want to know how that felt from the inside, Michael himself once described what it was like to have his private world torn apart by investigators searching for something that simply wasn't there.
They turned my room upside down, went through all my books, all my videotapes, all my private things, and they found nothing that can say Michael Jackson did this. Nothing.
It's a strange thing to sit with. For years, one of the most powerful investigative agencies on Earth kept a quiet file on the most famous man on Earth. They treated him as a suspect. They treated him as a target. They spent real time, real money, and real resources chasing the truth. And in the end, the truth they found was the one his fans always believed. The full story may never be completely public, remember. Hundreds of those pages are still sealed. But of everything that was released, the most startling thing isn't what the FBI uncovered. It's what they didn't. If this fascinated you as much as it did me, subscribe for more stories the headlines left out, and tell me in the comments, were you surprised by what the FBI concluded? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.